Hey, this is Mark Pattison with Finding Your Summit, again with another just incredible episode. And I got to take a big deep breath because I interviewed one of the most amazing women I've ever spoken to or met in my life, and she's overcome so much. And so, of course, this podcast is all about overcoming adversity and finding your way to success. Her name is Kathy Eldon, and Kathy has gone through eating disorders. She's gone through divorce, illness. She's lost everything. She's loved again and then found out that the guy she was in love with had cancer. And the worst thing of all, she lost her 22-year-old brilliant son in Somalia. He was stoned to death. And we go through each one of these things. And as you can imagine, very challenging to talk about these different subjects. But, you know, rather than her focus on the sorrow of the events, she really chooses happiness and really going towards that bright light. And so we go through it, and I just find her so resilient in the way that she has always kept fighting back and trying to take a negative and turn it into a positive. And just her spirit is so infectious that I was sitting there as I was interviewing her and just so inspired by possibilities. And we all have setbacks. I've had mine. And, turning that into something in a very, very, very positive light. So, again, just so inspiring. And as always, please go in, rate, review, and check us out on iTunes. And it really helps in our rankings and whatnot. So I appreciate all the love. You're going to absolutely adore this woman, Kathy Eldon. And here we go. Hey, this is Mark Pattison back again with another episode of Finding Your Summit. And this week, I'm so grateful because I'm with one of the most wonderful women I've ever met in my life. She is the founder of Creative Visions. She's written over 17 books. She's a filmmaker, a public speaker, and she's from Iowa.
Yep.
Wow.
That's now you're getting to the good bits.
Yeah, this is Kathy Eldon. Kathy, how are you doing?
I am delighted to have you here, Mark, and to talk about mountaineering.
Actually, I don't want to talk about mountaineering. You know, Finding Your Summit, as we talked about months ago when we were kind of hatching this whole idea, is really about fighting through adversity and finding successful outcomes, on the back end of that. And I've talked to a number of different people now in the sporting world, in the business world, in the relationship world. And I don't know anybody who's more resilient and who's overcome more adversity than you. And it's just such a credit, and you're a beautiful soul to start with. And I really wanted to get into your story on some of the things that you've done. And just for the listener, I'm just going to give some teasers, from the top there that are the headlines, really. Eating disorders, divorce, illness, lost everything. You've loved again, and then that person got cancer. And through all that, you fought back, and you've found your way into a very successful life. And I think what I found out about you when I visited, first 4 months ago, is that maybe of all those things, the most tragic thing is losing a son, 22 years old in Somalia. Dan.
It's hard to compete with that one.
Yeah, no, it's just, but again, this is about finding your summit in the context of there's multiple summits and we all go through adversity, and I've gone through my fair share, and we all have, right? And
there's no way out but through. Every human being, to be honest, it's what makes us who we are. And I think the people who have had what we perceive to be a blessed life with very few challenges, that's wonderful, but going through the stuff and coming out the other end and finding a beautiful view or a bit of light or other people who've gone through stuff, those are great triumphs, and they shape us. And I don't know who it said was, where we're scarred, that's the strong part. And I just would feel very sad for the people who haven't been through the hard stuff because they're missing the joy of being out the other end.
Yeah, and one of the things I want to do today is talk to you about how you got through the other side. What strategies that you used. And I'm going to quote something that I found, and this might have been from you, I think it is. The human spirit is to overcome all obstacles as we achieve our highest potential. That's really profound, and it's really, it's amazing. And I think that that's what we're talking about here, overcoming those obstacles and trying to figure out what is the best of the best that you can be.
Interestingly, there's another part of that phrase, I think, that might have got dropped off, but I always want to achieve my potential, both for myself and for others. So it's one thing to just achieve your potential, but if you're not in some way in service of others and our global tribe, I think it's only part of the joy that we can actually feel when we achieve that potential.
Yeah. So I think, we'll get into that in a minute. That's Creative Visions. And that's a lot of what you're talking about, which is just an amazing organization. I want to go back to growing up because, we don't just all fall out of a tree and we are who we are. You're such a generous person in the way your spirit is of the human spirit at its fullest potential. But talk to me about growing up, how you ended up in London during the 60s, which must have been a crazy time, and then what led you to Kenya.
Okay, so reel it back. I was born in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. I didn't grow up on a farm, but our community was in the middle of very high cornfields as far as the eye can see. I was lucky. My parents were really interested in global issues, and they joined the United Nations organization when I was about 6 or 7 years old. They enrolled me in German lessons when I was 9, and French lessons when I was 12, and Russian when I was 17. So there was this global awareness. We traveled to Europe. My father sold everything we had, I think, to get us all to Europe when I was 13 years old, to 11 countries, including Russia at the height of the Cold War, and Berlin when the wall was going up. So I was shaped by an awareness that Iowa wasn't. It's the epicenter of the planet, of course, but there was something more. And I was very fortunate at the age of 16 to be selected to be an American Field Service student to go to South Africa to study at an Afrikaans school in the middle of the Orange Free State, which was a lot like Iowa, weirdly. But that was a radical revelation for me because those kids were ultimately what we would call racist. Everybody I went to school with believed that Black people were ultimately totally inferior, but you should be very kind to them at some level, but they shouldn't live anywhere near you. And they had curfews and apartheid, which kept people very separate. And I realized that these people were not bad people. They'd been brainwashed by a church that firmly believed in this separation of races. But I couldn't hate the kids. I could hate their dogma and their belief system, but I didn't hate them. So that was a big lesson for me. And as we're facing a world where there's so much divisiveness and concern and discussion about racism, I think we have to step back and understand that people are taught things, but that doesn't make them a bad person. Yep. We have to get over that.
Learn behavior.
Yep. Exactly. So that was a pretty amazing beginning. I went off to college and I fell madly in love with a young Englishman who was living in London. And of course, all I wanted to do was move to London. But I spent a year teaching school in Iowa before running away with him. We got married and, a lovely wedding in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. But I was in England so fast you wouldn't know what hit. And I was 22 years old in swinging London. But for me, it was, we were young. We had absolutely no money. So we swung as much as we could, going to art galleries and free things. But it wasn't exactly, a wild scene. And within a year, I had a baby. And I found of course, moved to the suburbs, which was devastating for me because I'd been brought up to believe I had a role to play in changing the world around me. And I was stuck in the suburbs with ultimately two little kids. Yep. Thought I'd die.
And this would be Dan and Amy, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So now you guys, what was the drive to get to Kenya?
I was very lucky because my husband was promoted and he became the youngest head of a country for this International Computers Limited. It was sort of like the IBM of Britain. And age 30, he and I was 29, went out to Kenya for him to run this company. And of course, we knew absolutely nothing. We had a 7-year-old and a 3-year-old, and arrived in Nairobi, which was this explosive, fabulous, nation-building, 1977 incredible environment and I very rapidly managed to talk my way onto the local newspaper, where I first was the eating out, and then I was food, and then I got to do interviews with amazing, creative, active people, and they were not asking permission. They were not, getting licenses to do what they were doing. It was like, okay, we want it. We something needs to happen. We're going to go and do it. So I was really inspired by these people. And my son, Dan, who was then just a kid, would trail along behind me and be inspired too. And he, at the age of about 14, realized that a young scholarship kid who was living in the worst slum in Kenya needed a heart operation. And he gathered his friends together and they started Operation Restore, Save a Heart. And I have no idea how they raised the money, legal, illegal, no idea. But we had a lot of wild parties in the backyard that he charged for. But he raised the money for this little girl to have a heart-saving operation. This kind of got him excited about the whole concept of helping. And when he found a Maasai family where it really needed school fees, he sold the Maasai jewelry, which I'm wearing today.
Yep.
To raise the money for this family to get education for their kids. So he went from an individual to a family. When he was 18, he traveled to a refugee camp in Malawi and discovered that they had no water. The women were carrying water miles every day. So he gathered together a bunch of unlikely kids from 7 countries, got 2 Land Rovers, went across Africa on a 7-week safari to deliver aid to this refugee camp. Now, that safari changed everybody's lives, including on the safari was Christopher Nolan, who is the director of Dunkirk, one of the greatest directors in the world. Rocco Bellic, who is the Oscar-nominated director of Genghis Blues and the film Happy, which is really questioning what makes us happy. Amy Eldon, my daughter, was on that safari, who became a producer and a writer. And Jeff Gettleman, who's now the bureau chief for the New York Times in India, was on that safari.
Incredible. So your son now becomes this amazing journalist. When I came in here months ago, I came in here with another agenda, and my goal was to talk about something basically completely irrelevant to any of this great stuff that you're doing. And you said, hey, can I just give you a quick tour? And so we walked through the building, and you showed me all this art and all of his photographs and writings and everything else that your son, who at 22 unfortunately passed away, which I want to talk about. I was blown away, and I was blown away by how proficient he was in terms of the body of work he had done. And I as I was looking at this, I was like, whoever did this must have been, 30 or 40 or 50 with as much stuff as he did. And it was just blew me away. Like, he captured that much stuff in that period of time, He worked fast. He was 22 when he was killed on assignment with Reuters news agency in Somalia. But we discovered after his death that he had left behind 22 journals. And it's about 3,000 images. We now have an art dealer who's handling the art to benefit the foundation. But his perspective on life was that of a young explorer, adventurer, quester. And it awakens something in people when they see it in a collection of his journals called The Journey is the Destination. It was just republished by Chronicle Books with a new foreword by Kwaku Mandela. I love that. I absolutely love that title.
Concept.
Yeah.
Well, was something that he really brought to the world. And I think through the book and his work, that has become a phrase that we see all over the place. But when that book came out, nobody was really using it. So I'm excited for that. But we've recently made a feature film about Dan, which tells the story of the safari that the kids went on, and then how Dan became the youngest Reuters photojournalist, and how what was essentially a relief mission to save people, because he actually brought the famine in Somalia to the world, which created the desire to bring a relief mission to Somalia, but it deteriorated into a terrible, devastating situation. And the day that Dan was meant to leave, tragically, there was a bombing by UN forces under United States control of a house where they believed the warlord who was causing all this problem was hiding. He wasn't there. It was misinformation. The bombing killed 80 people, wounded another 200, and the survivors ran to get the journalist to come and tell the story. But when the journalists arrived at the site of the bombing, the people were so angry and hurt and enraged by what had happened that they struck out at the journalists. And it wasn't black versus white. There were 2 African journalists as well. So it was really about the other,
So how do you get over that as a mother? How does that?
One phrase that comes to mind is no way out but through. And you don't, other people have said, you don't get over it, you get through it. Mm-hmm. And I got through it by almost immediately deciding I had to transform it. The senseless death of these 4 young people, I had to try to do something to make a meaning, create meaning around it. And I remember talking to the head of Reuters when he came for the memorial service, and I said, we can't let these lives be in vain. And so we created a book and a traveling exhibit, and we did lectures about journalists at risk. And I really dedicated several years of my life to to creating awareness of the fact that there is someone between the news, and right now we're seeing what's happening with Harvey, the hurricane and the horrible devastation. But there is a news gatherer, there's somebody in between, and it may be somebody with a cell phone nowadays. But when you're dealing with a crisis situation, there is somebody gathering that information and sharing those pictures. And what that does to the person who is collecting that information, and often in conflict zones, war zones, those people are in terrible, grave danger, particularly now, because it's not like there's a battle line and you stand behind it. You are often embedded with troops, or you're on your own. You're a freelance who's out there gathering the information. So that, for me, became a personal sort of quest, and we worked together with Reuters and the Associated Press. So that gave me something to pour the energy into. That did not in any way mitigate the grief. That grief is something you have to go through it. Mm-hmm. And it comes in waves, and everybody who's grieved knows exactly what I'm talking about. And you think, oh, well, I can deal with this. And then you get another wave, and it crashes you into the rocks and onto the shore. And you're battered and bruised, and then you have a little respite, and then it comes again. But over time, it comes less frequently, and there is more time between the waves. But even now, 25 years later, I can go into that space of grief. It's profound and it's deep. Mm-hmm. There was a quote by Khalil Gibran that I'm butchering, but it's essentially that dig deep the well of sorrow, for therein lies your joy. Mm. And that's true whether you've lost a relationship, a catastrophic, like what's happening right now, with people losing everything they own. You have to go into that sorrow, I believe. It's fine. It's fine to grieve. It's fine to howl with rage and at what has happened to you, and be in that space, but ultimately know that therein lies your joy. And one day you're going to fill up that well of sorrow. Yeah,
well said. So I want to come back to Dan, and I want to talk to you about moving back to the States. Sounds like you went through a divorce with your first husband.
That was before.
That was before.
Yeah, that was before. And that was, honestly, it prepared us. It was so painful that my husband, Mike, and I always say that prepared us for Dan's death. Because the sundering of a relationship that has been so important with children and a life that one creates together, that is a death. It's a loss as profound almost, and sometimes equally painful as the loss of an individual.
Yeah, well, I've been through it, so I know that pain, and it's awful, but as you said, you have to go through, and once you get to the other side, there can be a lot of joy. Right?
And so, I always hope that there's love of what was. We may not feel like we love that person where that person is right now, but if we can try ultimately to imagine that one day we will be able to view that other person with a memory of the love that we once shared. And so always moving towards the loving solution, and that can seem absolutely impossible when you're going through it. But over time and with grandchildren or whatever it is down the line, one wants to be able to face that other person and remember only the good. And that's hard.
Yeah, it is hard. I think it's also part of the human brain, the way it works. And we tend to, after a while, gravitate towards those positive things that were once, ripe in that relationship or with that person, versus the other way of just hold on to negativity because, we haven't talked about this exactly, but just the way that you operate your life, you cannot fly high with negative weight on your back. Right?
You've said that beautifully, and I never know who actually said it, Desmond Tutu or whomever, but, to not forgive is like taking poison and thinking the other person will die. Ultimately, we are the ones who are having the weight of anger and hatred and retribution and revenge. Those are really heavy things. And when we can release that, my favorite phrase now is bless and release. It's like, okay, I'm just going to bless it and release it, and sometimes you've got gritted teeth, but it's like the more you can do that. And it's hard, but to hang on to it, you're the one who's going to be weighted down, not the other person.
Yeah, and I think, what you're talking about, really finding joy at some point in time, once you've gone through the pain, really applies here. And really being the inspiration behind the whole creative vision. So can you talk about that? And then this is the thing that I was blown away, when I came in here 4 months ago, is you've really turned this loss into a tremendous gift for so many. And I think it's really important. And there's so many people involved, with this. And if you could tee that up and tell us about that and how he's kind of the inspiration behind that, I'd love to hear it.
Thank you, Mark. When Dan was killed, I had been a journalist in Kenya, and I'd made a feature film on ivory poaching because I believe that storytelling is the essence of positive change in our world, or negative. I mean, my goodness, a lot of negative stories about anti-heroes tend to inspire the wrong parts of us. But I believe passionately in the power of media. So when Dan was killed, I decided I had to make a feature film that would shine a light on these young people who were doing such great work in the world, and I wanted it to inspire other people, young people, to believe they had a role to play in changing the world for the better around them. So I moved to Los Angeles in 1993, determined to make a feature film. And
have you ever done a feature film before?
I'd done a film. I was a very small cog in a film on ivory poaching in Kenya. Yeah. But to move to Los Angeles, I really knew not a single person. Yeah. And I had no resources, and I was with a very interesting man who had helped produce the feature film, but I was broken. I was really, really broken and grieving. I arrived, and within a year, I actually had a deal with Disney, and it was going to be this amazing film, and we had, wonderful people involved. And then they fired the head of Disney. I mean, that was classic. It was one of the Disney affiliates. So then another, 3 or 4 years, I got a deal with Columbia Pictures, with Lisa Henson, who's absolutely wonderful. She hired a director, Bronwyn Hughes, a writer, Jan Sardi, who was nominated for an Oscar. We had a script. We had Orlando Bloom attached. It was all a go. And then Orlando Bloom decided he had to do another film, I think Pirates of the Caribbean, something. Yeah. So I had to put a pin in it over and over again for years and years and years. And finally, everybody kind of gave up and wandered off. So I got the rights back. But by then, I had decided that we had to make a documentary. And Amy my daughter, at the age of 21, had come up with an idea at Boston University to do a film called Dying to Tell the Story, which was a documentary about journalists at risk. So we went off to 7 countries, shot this amazing documentary with Amy's vision and Kira Thompson's unbelievable direction. It was nominated for an Emmy. We thought, well, this is easy. This whole documentary thing, there's no problem. So we went on to have a career in documentaries and discovered it's incredibly difficult. Yeah. We did a film on the children's peace movement in Colombia that premiered at the United Nations. We did a series for PBS that nearly killed us called Global Tribe.
You're talking about getting funded.
Yes, It's so flipping hard. Yeah. So we decided to start an organization, Creative Visions, dedicated to creative activists, like those people that I interviewed all those years ago in Kenya who inspired Dan, people who are excited, they've got a spark, they've got something they want to do in the world, and they roll up sleeves and they bloody well do it. We support people using arts and media. Art, music, dance, drama, mostly film, storytellers telling stories that need to be told about problems that need to be solved. So we started off with one wonderful young woman who wanted to go to India to teach illiterate people how to make film. Ridiculous. She now is the head of Video Volunteers, which is the largest producer of community-based videos in India. Hundreds and hundreds of people who are essentially rickshaw drivers, maids, they're not, Steven Spielberg. These are simple people who are making films about issues that really matter in a country where those stories are not being told. We've gone on to work with hundreds and hundreds of people who pass through here, and officially with about 260 people. And the impact of this organization, of these people, is we reckon 100 million people have been touched by our stories.
Incredible.
We make our own media. We also support kids with Rock Your World, which is an educational program that uses a curriculum that's based on the Declaration of Human Rights. Deep dive into that, and then they take what matters to them and create media around it. So cool. We've just produced the feature film about Dan, which is now, we're rolling out this month.
And the name of that is what?
It's called The Journey is the Destination.
The Journey is a we love that title.
It took 24 years to get it to this place, but we premiered at the Toronto Film Festival with 2,000 people, so that was just a huge
Who is the
excitement.
lucky guy that played Dan?
Ben Schnetzer channels Dan Eldon, and Ben has been in many, many films. He's an absolutely wonderful rising young star. Maria Bello plays me. Ella Purnell plays my daughter Amy, and Ella's been in all sorts of films, including something Miss Peregrine's weird, whatever it is, but she's so talented. Sam Hazeldine is playing one of the journalists. We have a really beautiful cast, and we shot it in South Africa with Kwaku Mandela, Nelson's grandson.
Great location. It's a beautiful story. And when I came in, again, probably 4 months ago, I want to repeat this story that that it was just, it was really amazing. And I've told this story a few times over. And so we're here in Malibu, California, the most beautiful spot you could ever imagine. We're right on Pacific Coast Highway, overlooking the ocean, and they've got this beautiful conference room in the middle of this office space. And so I was in there with yourself, I was in there with your daughter Amy, and we're having this conversation about a lot of the things that I'm doing in my channels and whatnot, Finding Your Summit and coming up with that, and having this just really positive conversation about where this whole thing could go. And we're drinking this water from one of these glasses I'm now holding in my right hand that nobody can see. And all the waters were on a glass table. And in the middle of all this, Amy's glass explodes, and not just like fell over. I mean, I was on the other side of this 8-foot round table, glass is shooting over at me, on my lap, across the room, on the walls, it was crazy. And it was just like, we're looking at each other like there's something going on here, some really positive energy, that Dan is in the room.
Wake up, people.
Like, wake up. And, I was meant to be in that room at that time. I really believe that. And, so people can look at that in any way they want, but it was just a really bizarre moment. And Amy didn't take her glass and crush it, you couldn't, even if you tried. With my strength, I couldn't crush this glass. It's a heavy duty, and the thing literally exploded. It was just a beautiful
spontaneous explosion. It was absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, we all woke up.
And we woke up really quick, and so, anyways, it was just. I want to repeat that because it was a unique moment for me, and with all the positive energy that are here amongst the women that work, at Creative Visions, and all the things that we're talking about, possibilities and where I could go, and giving me hope and things like that. It was just like on the table. Like,
and it happened. And look at you. This podcast is so popular.
Yeah.
Well done, man.
Well, it's going in all the right directions. So it's such a great thing. So let's talk about, and I don't know much about this. I just read a little snippet about this, about the project that you were either involved in or you're involved now with Julia Roberts and Oprah.
We had a really exciting opportunity to work with Julia Roberts. I knew her through her production company, and her head of production, Phil Rose, was a dear friend of mine, and his wife, Jane. So we got to know Julia. And Julia is, of course, an extraordinary, beautiful force. And she wants to do good things in the world, and she is doing good things. We decided together to do a project called Extraordinary Moms. And it was to look at how mothers are changing the world around them. So we reached out to Hillary Clinton, who said yes, Christiane Amanpour.
And Hillary and you went to Wellesley.
Yes,
right?
We did. And
yeah.
We'd met before. I have such utmost admiration for an extraordinary woman. Mm-hmm. Talk about, glass ceilings or glass exploding. She's amazing. So Hillary Clinton, we went and interviewed together, and that led us to meet President Obama, which was beyond excited. He was very taken by Julia Roberts, of course. It was like, whoa.
Who wouldn't be, right?
He was meeting Julia.
Pretty woman.
It was fun.
Yeah.
And we interviewed Christiane Amanpour, who is all of our heroines. Rosie O'Donnell, about the support that she's given to foster children over the years, and what it was like to be the mother of 4 adopted children. 4 adopted children. We also interviewed Norma Bastidas. Norma, at that time, was summiting. She was had summited all the top peaks in order to raise money for her son who was going to be blind. We did not know it at the time, but Norma was trafficked. She was a victim of human trafficking. Wow. That only came out because of her involvement with this show. And now recently we've done a film with her, helped her with a film called Be Relentless, which is about Norma's actually running from Mexico City to Washington to create more awareness of the whole issues around trafficking. The film...
Talk about overcoming adversity, right?
Man, she's just brilliant, wonderful. Wow. And they're communicating through I Empathize, a wonderful curriculum that people should look up, how to really deal around these issues of trafficking and how you can spot it, and then what do you do with people who've been through it. The film, our film, premiered on the Oprah Winfrey Network with Oprah, who we had met twice before when we were very honored to be on the Oprah Winfrey
And is
show.
This recently?
This was actually 2012.
Okay.
So that was a while ago. Yeah. But it led to Hillary Clinton asking Julia Roberts to be a global spokesperson for Safe Cook stoves. So I was very proud of that with the United Nations.
I saw your Safe Cook stove little demo video.
Yes.
Very cute. Oh. And it looks great. Right?
Thank you. I don't think I remember that.
Yeah, well, I've seen it, so I can tell you all
Good.
about it. Both you and Amy got on there, I think, and talked about this great product. Okay, so another thing you are in this long list of, I've got a few more things here that you are a wonderful, accomplished person on, and one of those things is public speaking. So I want to talk about the F word transformed.
Okay. I thought more people would watch it like that. It's about forgiveness.
Yeah, I know that. But, when that first comes out of your mouth, you're like, okay, what are we talking about here, right?
Exactly.
And it's actually, I think, I love that word and the way you're about to use it. I know what this means, but I want you to explain it.
Right. I think one of the most important things in life is, as I say, the bless and release concept. To go through life with the weight of anger, retribution, revenge, hatred weighing us down is a real shame. And when we can try to learn to release, and sometimes forgiveness is really, really hard. That can be just too much of a leap for people. And it certainly was too much of a leap for me early on when I knew Dan had been stoned to death by a mob of Somalis. And I was really angry. I understood exactly why they did it. I 100% understood. They were so angry at what had happened to them that they struck out. And I get it, but I couldn't really forgive.
Yep.
And so that journey to forgiveness took me many years. And I talk about it. I talk about it in my book, In the Heart of Life, which is a memoir that I wrote. But I describe how I'd been back to Somalia with Amy to do our film, Dying to Tell the Story. And when I was there, we visited the site of where Dan had been killed, and it was still a terrible place, and that nothing had been restored, and it was just awful debris. And as we were there, women started gathering around the vehicle that we were going to leave, and they started pounding on the vehicle, saying, you're reminding us of what happened. Get out of here, get out. And the cameraman said, we've got to leave now. And so I had to
run. Must have been terrifying.
It was scary, and it was also, it made me really mad because why were these women behaving like this? Of course, I knew because they had lost their husbands and brothers and fathers and uncles and aunts. Women and children died on that scene. But again, it was like, I wish they wouldn't have done that. And so we left Somalia. We flew out very quickly because we couldn't even spend the night. It was far too dangerous. We came back with the footage and cut the film. And 7 months later, we were going to have a premiere at the United Nations. And as we piled, I remember Amy and I piled into a taxi cab on our way to the United Nations. And I looked in front of me, and my gosh, the taxi driver was clearly Somali. And Somalis are beautiful people, very elegant people. And I knew he was Somali. And I thought, what am I going to do? Do I tell him? Do I not tell him? And Amy kind of rolled her eyes, and we were both really didn't know what to do. And then I thought, I'm going to tell him. And so I told him to the back of his head exactly what had happened to Dan, and just told him. And when we got to the United Nations, and all the flags were fluttering outside, he stopped the car and he turned around, and I said, how much is it? And he said, friends don't pay in this car. And he said, I know exactly what happened. I know everything about your son. And he kind of looked at me, and he had tears in his eyes. And he said, on behalf of all Somalis, I ask your forgiveness. And it was like, wow, what do I do? This is amazing. And I thought, ultimately, Gandhi said, we have to be the change we wish to see. So if the world is going to change, I have to change. So I said, thank you. I said, I understand why they did what they did, and I forgive. And it was like whoosh, like a skylight opens in the top of your being, your soul, and all that yucky stuff rushes out, and there's light that comes in. And I felt lighter and lightened. I felt deeply relieved that I was able to release that.
Yeah.
And when we were on the shoot in South Africa, the people I felt closest to were the Somalis, who are so, tortured and persecuted. Not only in their own country, and they run to another country like South Africa to escape from the horror of what they face in Somalia, but they're persecuted. So yeah, big lessons.
Yeah, well, again, we're talking about the F word, in this case, forgiveness, and just think about what the world would be a better place if we just all forgave each other from these wrongs that happen all the time versus all the angriness that we tend to harbor and then hold on to, and then again, it doesn't get you anywhere, and just people get in their factions, and you don't get, the ball does not move forward.
Nope. I love all your analogies, sporting analogies, strategy. What's my strategy, and the ball moving forward. I love it.
Yeah. Well, I can't take the football guy out of me, the mountain climber, but okay. So you've done 17 books. I'm trying to get one out the door, right? And I've been talking about this, and I've got some potential co-writers that are going to help me along with this, but just the amount of work it takes. And you've got so many projects on the board with all these different wonderful artists and whatnot that have joined, the Creative Visions team and whatnot. Where do you find the time to write a book? And the title of this book is The Heart of Life, Kathy Eldon. I mean, I'm looking at this book across the room, and there's a lot of pages there. And it's a beautiful cover, by the way.
Thank you.
I mean, where do you find the time to do this?
That book took 16 years, so that's a really anomaly. I had to live the life first. I had to live a life worth sharing and tell a story worth reading, is the way I describe it. Thousands of trees died in pursuit of this particular book. I mean, it was rejected by many publishers over time, and I think that my advice to writers is always to realize writing is rewriting. Listen to why things are rejected. Listen and do what you have to do to get to the next stage, so somebody will accept it. The other books I've written many times, books I've done, and my books are little books. There's nothing monumental except for that one, but they were written often in response to something that happened. So that one of the first books we did was early on. I did cookbooks and eating out guides and travel, because that was my life and that was fun. But then after Dan was killed, Amy and I were absolutely heartbroken, and she was in such a bad state, and then I was in a bad state, and we passed it back and forth. But one day she said, "Mom, I cannot go on," and she just dropped out of college, and she was working in a restaurant in New York. And I said, I just kind of grasping for straws, I looked around the room, and I had an angel catcher hanging on the wall of my bedroom. And I said, Amy, I know you can create an angel catcher. I had a dream catcher, I had a dream catcher on my wall. And I said, you can write an angel catcher. She said, well, what's that? And I said, get your journal and capture all the memories you have of Dan. Get everything he ever said. Remember what his sound of his voice was like. Just gather it all now. So she came back Christmas with this book, and she called it her angel catcher. And we realized that it was an idea that we could actually, share with others. So we put together a book, which was published by Chronicle Books, and it's still on sale all these years later. It's a guided journal. And that led to Soul Catcher, which is a journal to help you become who you really are. And then that led to, we realized after about 8 or 9 years of doing all these books and all these films that we didn't have the right men in our lives. So we did Love Catcher, and that was a journal to bring more love into your life.
Yeah, I could use that.
Yeah, exactly. You got it.
Yeah.
But we I materialized an extraordinary man who was living on the beach in Malibu. Miracles happen. And he was living next to, renting his other house to a director named John Turtletaub, who was at that time doing National Treasure. And Amy met John, fell in love, and married him. I married Michael, and we lived side by side on the beach in Malibu. And when the opportunity to move into this beautiful space right across the driveway from us came up, my husband enabled us to create the magic that's within this space. He's a designer, and so we are so lucky. But we can create visions. Our organization is called Creative Visions. We can create visions for ourselves. We can dream big dreams. We can envision the summit that we will climb. And we don't do all this stuff alone. We need to hold hands with other people. Ultimately, it's you who has to drive your way forward. But we need to collaborate. We need to join hands with others. It's so much easier if we're sharing the journey.
Yeah, so I've seen you and Amy, you're dynamic, and it's beautiful. It really is to have a mother-daughter relationship like that. I've got 2 daughters myself, 18 and 21, and they're beautiful, and we talk to each other every day, tell each other that we love it, love one another, and it's awesome in that respective. And but to actually see you two working together, sharing your common vision together, obviously a tremendous love for the son and the brother that you lost. Yeah. It's really cool. And now to affect others based on, loss, to turn that into a triumph is really a wonderful thing. So
thank you, Mark. I call Dan a noisy spirit.
He was noisy.
Yeah, he was noisy.
Room, right?
He was noisy.
Exploded.
I believe that energy does remain, and that we can interact with it. And I'm a journalist. I do films for CNN, but in my experience, I feel like I could not have done any of this stuff alone. And so I talk about joining hands with physical beings, but I also believe that we're surrounded by spirit energy that we can tap into, call it God, spirit, great spirit, whatever, Mother Earth. There's more that we can tap into, a different energy, a love and a power and energy that we can tap into.
Yeah, so I think you've said it all, and I'm not looking for you to repeat, these things, but for anybody that's listening to this podcast, is there like one closing, going through a tough time? You've talked about forgiveness, and you've talked about releasing that the energy, bless and forgive, or
bless and release, yeah.
Bless and release. You've had so many little quirks that really fit well, I think, with overcoming and moving forward in those. But is there any last?
Yep. It's a Winston Churchill. I had it on my fridge forever. It's never give in, never give in, never, 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 never. You just keep going, one step after another. You keep your eye on that summit and don't give up.
The thing I tell my daughters every day, I talked to my older daughter this morning, Claudette, and I said, my corny, stupid thing, I say every day, but served me well in so many different ways, is it takes a little more to make a champion, right? And when you break that down, it's just like you're going through a hard time. You got to pull your bootstraps up, and you got to get through it, and you're going to get to the other side. Or to get to that destination, you have to work a little bit harder, do more things, lift more weights, whatever it is, to get to that point, right? So that has served me well for a long time. And like I said, my kids roll the eyes, but it's really implanted on their brain. So, well, listen, where can people find you? Creative Visions. Yeah,
kathyeldon.com, creativevisions.org. If you want to learn about Dan, daneldon.com.org. And also for the educational program, rock-your-world.org. All of it can be found.
Can you say that again? Because that's a lot.
Yeah, I love
dashes.
It. Okay, sorry, rock-your-world, rock your world, but with dashes in between.
Okay.
.org. And that's just a brilliant educational program that I'd love every teacher out there to jump on.
Okay, that's great. And what I will also do is put a lot of these links and whatnot on my website. And well, listen, it has been a joy equally from the first couple times I was down here. I met the energy of the room, of you, of your wonderful daughter. And I really feel like I'm a better person having done this podcast and having you on this show today. So thank you so much.
Honored. And remember, the journey is a destination. Please enjoy the journey.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you. Hey, this is Mark, and thank you so much for tuning in to the podcast this week. We had another great guest, and it is so awesome to continually have these different people on, talk about their different adversity, how they've overcome that, and what they've done to affect change in their life to become very successful. So, really appreciate you guys tuning in. So, as always, we love the rating and reviews that you guys do on iTunes. If you haven't done that, please go do that. It really helps us in terms of increasing our visibility within Apple iTunes. And anyways, it's just fun to share the love and what these different stories, these different people are all about. So make sure you tune in next week. We appreciate it. And that's it. Bye.